Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. The plan for today is to show you 4 different plants and 4 different trees, starting with the one you already can see right here in front of you. The trees that I'm going to show today are not already finished bonsais, so they're actually projects I started throughout this year or I worked considerably on throughout this year, and I simply want to show you a bit of progress now that the end of growth season is here. Let's start right away with this first tree here, which is a Ficus Benjamina variety, and the goal for this tree is to create a root over rock tree with this one. So for that reason, what I did with this tree is, of course, make it adhere to a rock, so you can see part of the rock here, and then to bury this rock in a lot of soil quite deeply into this pot here actually, because the goal is to get the roots actually to stick to the rock without having them dry out while we do this. And the best solution for that is to simply bury the tree with the rock so the roots can form just normally on this tree, and at the same time we also then get thicker, healthier trees that are also sturdy enough then to be above the soil level, and we will in hopefully a year or two then achieve this root over rock view on this tree. Let's look a bit at the health of this tree, because when I actually started this project with root over rock, I potted it up in organic soil first. I saw that the tree struggled a lot in there, so I decided to, after 2 to 3 weeks of doing the first repot, basically doing a second repot into inorganic soil. And since then, this tree has really flourished. You can see so much new growth on this tree. Basically everything above this level here, I would say, has been new growth this summer. You can see here still basically the remnants of the dieback that happened when I had it in the old soil, or when I first potted it up in this root over rock fashion. But since then it has rebounded in a really amazing way, a lot of new growth. And of course in the future we will also have to think then not just about this rock feature, which of course will be a prominent feature of this tree, but also how the tree itself will look like then. And for that I still have to think a little bit about that, but I think I will let this grow as high as possible at the moment, and later on I will then pull it back a little bit, cut it back to maybe even something like this branch here. Of course, once it started to thicken then and we get a nice thick trunk by letting it grow as wild as possible, cutting it back quite drastically then to a lower growth point here, and then really starting to work on the foliage. So probably most of this foliage, or all of this foliage up here, will be gone at a later point. But for now, of course, we need all this healthy foliage here and the health in this tree to make it grow as fast and as strong as possible, to also thicken the branch, the trunk here a little bit more. And of course also develop a nice root system down here that we of course will showcase later on. And that already brings me to my second tree, which is this little Ming Aralia here. This is also a tree that is far from being a finished bonsai. This is really a starter. I found this basically as this little plugs that you often sell in grocery stores or in box stores. And I thought, why not give it a try and actually grow something healthy from that? Normally those plugs really do tend to not develop that nicely. I had that problem with this one also in the beginning, because I saw when I repotted it right away that it was this little plug, but inside the little pot it came in, there was an even smaller cage-like pot that really stunted the growth of any roots on this tree. Of course, I removed that when I repotted it, and since then, so much new growth. This tree basically has doubled in height. I see a lot of new growth points all over this tree. You can see from all sides it is simply doing very well. Even down here, new growth starting to show. And I think this is a good sign that this tree does have potential. And even though it comes from just a little plug, basically a little tree that was cut at one point, then it grows little side branches and then they sell it like that, I think there is potential in this tree. So let me tell you a little bit about the ideas I have for this tree in the future. Of course, as is the case with all propagation projects or pre-bonsai projects, a lot comes down to getting a nice looking trunk that actually lends itself to develop into something similar of an old mature tree. That is of course still quite a long time for this tree. However, Ming Aralia does have a nice growing pattern with getting quite gnarly branches or gnarly trunks after a while once they grow strong and freely. So I do have hope that this will also be the case for this tree. We still have this very unsightly cut here, of course, where you just cut this little tree and then develop the side branches to sell it. That is something I will have to tackle next growth season. I didn't want to do it right away now with the repotting, also creating a huge open wound here at the top of the tree, but that will be something that we will see next growth season. I will probably slightly diagonally prune this back or cut out this part of the trunk and hopefully be able to incorporate this main branch here then into the trunk line of the tree. And at a later point, of course, also then have it spread further out here in the top. This might be more of a sacrificial branch here, helping us to also improve the thickness of the trunk down here. But for now, again, as is the case with most of those trees, is to simply let it grow. But I already have somewhat of a vision for this tree and a direction that at least the next steps that I want to take with it, I think have somewhat already fleshed out. So for the growth season, I'm quite happy with it. I had another Ming Aralia that unfortunately didn't make it over the last winter, so that is something I'm also a bit weary about, seeing how this one will do over the cold season. But again, I have this tree, as almost all of my trees nowadays, in inorganic soil. I did not do that with the old Ming Aralia that I had, and I think it simply stood in too moist soil for too long and got root rot, so that is something that shouldn't be the case with this tree. So I think the setup for this tree is better than from the other Ming Aralia that I had, and I think we'll come bring it quite nicely through the cold season. But yeah, probably in spring then we will get to work on this a little bit more. So then we come to a tree that already is a little bit further ahead in the development, or at least in the development idea that I have for it. It is another Ficus Benjamina. But in this case, we're not going for a root over rock style like we saw in the first tree. We're actually going for a cascade, or in this case, probably at the moment, rather a semi-cascade tree. So a tree that is, as the name already says, cascading over the pot, lower than even than the rim of the pot. And that is something that I have been doing with this tree actually for, I think, over 2 years now, where it started as a cutting basically from an older Ficus Benjamina that still is going quite strong, quite healthily. And that tree itself is very vigorous, and so is this little cutting that I took from it. When I took it, it was basically, this here was the main branch, so all the actual cascade part of it grew since then. It has developed quite nicely. I had a little hiccup with that at one point where basically the entire part here that I want to sort of use to counterbalance the cascading part here in the future died back, unfortunately. So what I'm trying to do right now is to fuse another Ficus Benjamina tree to the existing tree in here, simply to recreate the branch that was lost here, basically. Probably through back budding. There could have been a chance that also this would happen naturally. However, Ficus Benjamina is not the best ficus species or ficus variety when it comes to budding back. So I thought, why not try with fusing another tree to it? And I think until now, at least both of them are healthy in this pot right now. They do seem like fully the same, and the older leaves definitely. The newer ones come in slightly different. They come in more glossy on this tree than on this variety here. So there might be some different sub-varieties at work here, but the older leaves then definitely look similar enough so that you don't really spot any difference. What I will do also here in the future, of course, is looking at how the fusion is coming along and readjusting if that is needed. I simply wired those two trees together at this point because they do both grow quite vigorously. So I thought simply by limiting the space in which they can grow, they might start to fuse then once they run out of space to grow into. What I will do next year, also probably early spring for the next growth season, is already starting to work a little bit on the branch structure here. So that is something that needs to be done because right now, of course, it is growing just freely. It doesn't really have any form yet when it comes to the sub-branches, so the secondary and tertiary branches, and that is something we have to refine, of course, then in the future. Repotting could also be the case that we look at that next year, but yeah, probably once we repot it into an already actual bonsai pot, because this, of course, is just a clay pot right now, then it would make sense to also look into the wiring in early spring. But now again, for cold season, I just take care of it as usual. Of course, make sure I don't overwater this one as well, even though my Ficus Benjamina are quite forgiving in general, and always make it quite healthily through the cold season. But growth season was really nice on this one, so a lot of new foliage that has developed, and I can see that this will be a good tree to create then little pads down here and really work on a nice cascade shape. Not sure yet what I will do with the growth up here and how we will also incorporate in this part here, but a lot of trial and experiments that can be done on this tree, which is always fun, of course, on a project like this. And that already brings us to our last tree for today, which is this little cutting I took from a jade plant. It is that jade plant variety with those elongated, yes, tube-like leaves, I would say, that I find quite nice actually to look at this subspecies when it comes to bonsai, because it is just, it almost looks like a needle tree, and that is somehow really interesting to see then also if that can be turned into a nice looking bonsai. I do like the trunk of these varieties as well, because they start to look very old quite fast, because they get this bark-like look that always looks nice then also, because a jade plant, of course, as a succulent actually doesn't turn woody or anything, so this is always then nice to see when you find a species that still looks very similar to an actual tree. The goal for this one, not so sure yet, to be honest. So I took this as a cutting. I just thought it is too nice looking to not try to propagate it, so I just stuck it into this pot and hoped that there will be any roots in the future. Pretty sure there haven't been any roots yet. It is a succulent, so it does save its water for, yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks at this point already. So I just make sure I don't overwater. I water every couple of weeks, I would say, and if I see that it gets really shriveled up and it doesn't bounce back even when I water it, then I know still not any roots yet, but I think we will develop some roots on that still before the cold season really starts. And then the goal is just to develop a tree from it, so get a nice root system going in this little pot here, and look at the growth pattern. I'm still a bit unfamiliar with the growth pattern on this jade species and how to best prune them, because it becomes very clogged, as you can see here, so it's very difficult to actually clean that out and get a nice pad looking style going on this tree. But I think for this tree, as it already has such nice movement also in the trunk, we can do something interesting with that in the future. So this is again just a project of basically thinking let it grow as wild as possible and see where we go from there. The trunk already has a nice thickness. There is somewhat nice taper also showing. That definitely can still be improved over the future, of course, also with pruning back then. I'm always happy to also look at other varieties that you can turn into bonsai. Of course, it doesn't always have to be ficus, especially when we look at an indoor setting. Jade is also always a viable option then. So already looking forward to see where this one will take us. So we'll keep you updated on this one as well, as I will on all the other trees. I already mentioned some of the goals and some of the ideas I have for those trees. So we'll make sure to tag you along then, of course, also when it's time to work on those trees again. If you have any questions or any suggestions on what you would try on these trees and which direction you would go, leave them in the comments. I'm always happy to hear your ideas on those trees. And if you enjoyed this video, of course, feel free to leave a like. And if you enjoy my channel, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to it. And hopefully I will see you then in the next video. Until then, take care.